Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. So yesterday, Konami dropped a huge bombshell on us with the announcement of Rarity Collection 2. The first Rarity Collection was probably the best set that Konami has ever released, so the second one will certainly have a lot to live up to. But they've announced some crazy reprints, and with all of the same cool rarities coming back, but more cards being included in every single pack, it definitely has the community hyped. What we're looking at today though is how the announced reprints have pushed the prices of these cards down in just the same day of the reprint announcement, as players expect all of these cards to now be extremely accessible in a wide variety of rarities. Let's get started. So kicking things off, we're looking at Primeval Planet Perino. This is of course the field spell for the tier limit strategy, which searches for a tier limit monster or Visa Starfrost on activation, and also pops a card when you shuffle a tier limit monster back into the deck. Tier limits are a pretty interesting strategy. They started off as just a good deck when combined with the danger monsters, then they were tier 0 with the Ishizu cards, they fell off completely during Kashtira format, made a bit of a resurgence after Arise Heart finally got banned, and now that yugioh and Kelback are banned, it finally seems like the deck has mostly fallen off. I think there are still some players that are trying to make the deck work still, but the deck is nowhere nearly as good as it was before. Despite all of this time though, Perino has actually never seen a reprint, so we have just the one printing from back in Power of the Elements. As you guys can see here, Perino has been doing nothing but trend downwards over the last several months. Even before the last ban list dropped, I think a lot of players were assuming that we would see yugioh and Kelback banned, so there certainly was a sell-off leading up to the list dropping. While the card was up at a peak of around $40 over the last couple months, it has recently come down to about the $20 mark. Now, however, with this reprint announcement, Perinios are down to the $10 mark, which is the lowest that the card has ever been. And to be fair, this is probably higher than the card will be at any point after its reprint. There will be the quarter century, collector's rare printing, as well as even another secret rare printing. So even if people want to go and play tier limits as a legacy format, there's going to be a lot of nice options available, and there's not much reason for the original printing to carry as much value anymore. That said, I think Perino is a card that you probably try to sell as soon as possible if you can move it at all. You're probably going to be taking a pretty significant hit on it since you definitely bought the card at a much higher price, but all you can do now is try to get back as much value as possible. So next, looking at the other relevant field spell, Peaceful Planet Karium is in a similar but different situation to Perino. Karium is instead the searcher for the Manadium strategy, searching for a Manadium monster on activation, and rather than destroying something, Karium instead revives a tuner when one of them is destroyed. Now, whereas tier limits were a terrifying deck across several different formats, I feel like Manadium hasn't been nearly as relevant. There's still a scary deck in the right hands. Shout out to my buddy Danny Medina for getting like 20 different regional tops with the deck, but the deck is still vulnerable to cards like Droll and Lockbird, and it just feels like the deck hasn't had the same consistent success as other strategies. Nevertheless, this is another unexpected reprint, and it's actually a bit earlier than expected, as Karium was in Cyberstorm Access and theoretically shouldn't have been reprinted until the 2024 tins. Looking at Karium's price history, this card was at a peak of around $30 a few months ago, but dropped pretty steadily to around the $19 mark. That dip in the middle is right around when the ban list dropped, as the card did shoot up a little bit when it was confirmed Manadium wouldn't be hit, but everything else in the format would be, as players suspected that Manadium might be one of the format's top contenders, but it has gradually declined since then. However, the price drop that we've seen since the announcement has been similar to that of Perino, with the card now dipping to the $15 mark, and it seems like the card might even be starting to dip under that. The difference is that Karium is still a key card in a viable deck this format, whereas tier limit isn't exactly relevant, so you're much more likely to find someone wanting to play Manadium than tier limit, so they still need to own the card between now and May when Rarity Collection 2 comes out. However, if you guys do own the card but don't necessarily want to play the deck, you'll definitely want to look at offloading the card now as soon as possible, as the card will, just like Perino, dip even lower once the reprint is officially here. Next, let's look at one of the alternate art cards with Appaloosa Bo of the Goddess. So with the alternate art cards, the announcement just mentions that the variant art is getting printed, and it doesn't mention the original art. We don't know for sure if this means the original is going to be in there or not, since with the Rarity Collection 1, we did get both artworks of Eldritch in each rarity. Appaloosa is a card that has actually been seeing more play recently, just as a solid monster to end your turn with when going first, as it does put up multiple monster effect negations. We've been seeing all of the lower end printings of Appaloosa gradually trend upwards in price. Here you guys are seeing the 3-month graphs for the Ultra on top and then the Gold Rare on the bottom, In both cases, the big jump came in about a month or so ago, as each the Gold Rare and the Magnificent Maven's Ultras were around $5 to $6 before, but have jumped to around the $10 mark. Now, however, we are seeing both printings dip pretty hard, as either version is back to right around the $5 mark. Appaloosa is a card that you only ever really need one copy of. I don't think you would ever end up playing this card in multiples. There's certainly going to be a lot of players that are offloading their extras with this reprint coming, especially since the card will definitely look really nice in something like a simple secret rare. We're not going to speculate really on the original art versus variant art, since only time is going to tell us for sure. If the original artwork is reprinted, that's definitely going to bring down the Ultra and even the original secrets from Rising Rampage, but it's all just speculation at this point. At the very least for now, definitely look at getting rid of any alternate art copies that you have, as not only will the reprints be much more accessible, they'll come in nicer rarities as well. Alright, now we're on to a card that we actually looked at not too long ago on Market Watch. It's Magician's Souls. So Souls is a card that's meant to be used in Dark Magicians, but it actually gets used more by other strategies. Recently, we just talked about how it's potentially useful alongside the Snake Eye cards, as it can send Dia Bellstar from the deck to summon itself out, and sends monsters that are being treated as spells or traps to allow you to draw cards. Magician's Souls has never really had an accessible printing, with difficult to pull printings from Brothers of Legend, Legendary Duelist Magical Hero, and Legendary Duelist Season 3. Now, the price of Souls has really only moved when it comes to the secret rare versions. This copy was around $30 to $35 a week or two ago, starting to move upwards as players suspected that it might be meta relevant. Now, however, as you guys can see from the sold listings and the current prices on TCG Player, the card has already tanked in price significantly, coming right down to the $15 mark and staying steady there. The interesting thing is that this downward trend is only the case with the secret rare version and none of the ultra rare printings. For the most part, the ultras are still on TCG Player anywhere between $20 and $30 per copy, which is around the same price that it was sitting at before, suggesting we haven't seen too many players listing copies back onto the market and undercutting one another. I wouldn't, however, take this as a sign that the Ultras will retain more value. Sure, the colored Ultras will be different from any printing in Rarity Collection 2, but they've never been especially popular, and they're probably still going to be less sought after than something like the quarter century printing or the collector's rare. However, I think it's much more likely that players and vendors were just sitting on more of the secrets, since the Ultras from Magical Hero were difficult to pull, while the colored Ultras came from a set that really didn't have anything else good in it, so there weren't many players opening it. All of that said, don't expect the Ultras to do any better than the secrets, but rather expect them to make their way down to the same price point, just at a much slower rate. Up next, let's talk about Access Code Talker. So, Access Code Talker is one of the most iconic Link monsters ever made. This card has ended so many games on its own, essentially being a 5,300 attack point body that can pop your opponent's cards and not give your opponent a chance to respond. At the moment, Access Code is still a really useful card. I know that in some extra decks over in the OCG, players are opting to run the Salamangreat Raging Phoenix and Zealantis combo to take advantage of Promethean Princess, but that takes up quite a few spots in the extra deck, and Access Code Talker can just be a little bit more compact. We do have to remember that you can't make this code under Promethean Princess, but there's certainly other routes that you can take to get here. Price-wise, I feel like Access Code Talker is going to hurt regardless of what printing you have. When it comes to the easily accessible Crystal Revenge secret rare printing, which is the graph shown on top, or the gold rare, which is the graph shown on the bottom, each of them has fallen significantly. They had actually each been trending upwards gradually and were around the $40 to $45 mark, but now just a day after the reprint is confirmed, they're already down to $25 each. Obviously this is pretty huge, but I think that Rarity Collection 1 definitely set something of an expectation when it comes to the price of these expensive extra deck staples. I think a good card to compare Access Code to here is Baron de Fleur, which went from being like a $40 to $50 card to now only being a couple of dollars for the lowest rarity printings. To me though, the scariest thing is the Starlight Rare. Typically, high rarity staples and extra deck monsters have made for solid investments, but in the case of Access Code Talker, the Starlight Rare has done nothing but go down. This card used to be a $500 to $600 card, but it's now down to around the $300 mark, and now that you'll be able to get it as a quarter century secret rare, we can expect that to go down even further. Obviously, it won't be as cheap as the reprint since it's still a relatively difficult card to find, but even historically, if you look at something like Triple Tactics Talent, the Starlight Rare went from being $650 down to $350 once the quarter century printing became widely available. So yeah, definitely a bit of an awkward time to be holding onto this card. Expect it to still be useful over the next 4 to 5 months, so there's still going to be players that are looking to pick up the card in order to use it, but you guys will definitely want to move the card sooner rather than later, because the closer we get to Rarity Collection 2 dropping, the lower this card's price will go. Alright, with this one I'm just going to touch on it briefly. I'm not even going to show any of the graphs here, but it's IP Mascarena. Essentially everything that we're looking at here is the exact same as with Appaloosa. We have the alternate art coming for sure, but we don't know if the original art is going to be included in the set as well. Right now the alternate art only comes as a gold rare, and to be honest it doesn't really look that great. I've always thought that the alternate art would be nice as a secret rare, so it's cool that we're finally going to get that. That said, IP is a much cheaper and more accessible card than Appaloosa. When it comes to just using a copy of the card, you can grab any of those cheaper printings of IP for around $5. So that's going to include the secret rare from Battles of Legend, the ultra from Chaos Impact, or the gold rare. The alternate art gold rare is a little bit more expensive, and then you obviously have the quarter century and starlight rare printings, but for the most part the card is pretty cheap. Fortunately, the quarter century and starlight versions are the original artwork, so if only the alternate art is included in Rarity Collection 2, then those original artworks in high rarity might stay relatively unchanged price-wise. With how everyone is using SP Little Knight now, players will still need to have a copy of IP in their extra decks, but given that the Rarity Collection 2 reprint should make this basically a dollar card, I would offload basically any copy of this card that you have, aside from the quarter century, starlight, and a copy or two of the lower rarity printings for yourself to use. And finally, there's one last card I want to mention, and it's Silent Magician. This is a card that doesn't have any sort of meta implications whatsoever. It has interactions with Silent Magician level 4 and level 8, and it can negate a spell card as well. I don't believe this card has ever seen any sort of competitive usage. However, Silent Magician is historically an expensive card. It has been anywhere between $35 and $50 over the last couple of years for a couple of different reasons. The first is that the Silent Magicians were used by Yugi in the anime, so fans of the anime who want to collect the cards from there will probably try to pick this card up. The other thing is that it came out in Duelist Pack Rivals of the Pharaoh, an underwhelming set that introduced Lullaby of Obedience and Magnet Reverse into the game, but not much else. This card is pretty easy to overlook. There's actually been several times where I've bought a collection, and players will actually just leave this card unsleeved in their bulk. It's just not something that players seem to know or really have their eye out for, unless you're a fan of the anime and you're looking for this card specifically. I don't have any charts to show for this card either. It is something where it's just, even though it's getting reprinted, no one really has the card, so you don't see it too much in terms of sold listings or sellers undercutting one another. Personally, I think of this card as being very similar to something like Ancient Chant, which just got reprinted in Maze of Millennia. Ancient Chant was a $60 card for a little bit there since it had never gotten a reprint and it was relatively difficult to find, but now that that reprint finally hits, you can grab the reprint ultra rare for literally $2. Expect the same thing to happen with Silent Magician, so if you do still have the card for whatever reason, just look to offload it and you'll be able to buy the card back in a couple of months once the set drops for a fraction of the price. Alright guys, that is all we have for today's episode. I actually do have some other cards I was intending to talk about, but I guess I'll be talking about them next week instead. I remember talking with Tom about the possibility of a Rarity Collection 2. We thought it wasn't going to come out for a couple of years, but I guess here we are like 6 months later and we're getting another one. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch, please make sure you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Make sure you guys leave a comment in the comment section down below and hit subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.